We're exactly starting at 5:30. That's perfect. Great. Awesome. Um, okay, so thank you for thank you everyone for joining us today and for taking the time to join us in this discussion. In designing this and other webinars through the year, the Firki team is hoping that we can disseminate meaningful information and knowledge that will take us closer to our goal of improving the quality of education in Indian classrooms. Through this webinar, we have our speakers for today, Ms. Priya Iyer and Mr. Danish Abdullah, who will help us explore approaches to assessment and get us to discuss how we can use assessments in ways that support learning. By the end of the webinar, participants will have a better understanding of the two major approaches to assessments. They'll also become more familiar with the approach that supports learning better and gain some practical ideas to start using it in their classroom. With that, let's begin today's webinar with an introduction of our speakers for the evening. Let's start with Ms. Priya Iyer. Ms. Priya Iyer is the Academic Manager at British Council for East and Northeast India. After completing her bachelor's in Business Administration, Priya started her teaching career as a volunteer for the British Council Times of India, Teach India Partnership in 2011. She then worked as a master trainer with Teach India as a consultant with the Aga Khan Education Services and has worked as a British Council training consultant and academic coordinator since 2014 on a range of schools, English and skills projects, SES, across India. She has worked on large-scale teacher development projects in extremely challenging contexts in India. She speaks 6 Indian languages and enjoys reading, cooking, and traveling in her free time. Danish Abdullah is the Academic Manager at British Council for South India. He has worked in the field of English language teaching and teacher education, primarily in not-for-profit organizations for more than 10 years. He's worked extensively on British Council's large-scale teacher education and development projects in different states in India, planning and delivering training, conducting scoping and monitoring and evaluation activities, and working on material development. He has a graduate degree in commerce and a Cambridge certificate in teaching English to speaker of other languages. Currently, he's studying for the diploma qualification. He is passionate about learning languages. He speaks 3 international and 3 Indian languages, cooking, and volunteering for social causes. That brings us to the norms for the webinar today. For the first 75 minutes or so, I will hand the webinar over to Priya and Danish to take us through their prepared presentation. Given the large audience that we are expecting today, please keep your video and mic off to reduce stress on the bandwidth. Unmute it only when our speakers are taking questions and comments. To ask questions or to clarify anything, please write in the chat box. I will be there to curate your questions and comments throughout the webinar. We'll take them at multiple points during the webinar itself. We have Prerna from the implementation team on Firki who is taking notes, a summary of which will be circulated to you after the webinar. We will have multiple opportunities to interact with our speakers throughout the call. Feel free to post questions in the chat window throughout the call, and our speakers will try and get through as many questions throughout the webinar and in the last 15 minutes as well. This webinar will be recorded and will be available on YouTube and Firki too. That brings me to the end of my introduction. I feel like I've spoken plenty. Thank you for your patience. I really hope you have an interesting evening. I'm going to throw it open to our speakers now. I'm really excited to learn about assessments. I'm going to give us a minute. Priya and Danish, can you hear me? Can you please unmute yourselves and speak to us so we know that we can hear you and you can hear us.
Hi Rahul and hi everyone else.
Hi Rahul. Hi everyone else.
So would you say that we turn our video on, or is it okay to keep it off just to save bandwidth?
Danish, Priya?
Yeah, Rahul, Danish is checking if we need to turn our video on, or is it okay to keep it off to save bandwidth?
Can you hear us, Rahul?
Priya and Danish, it should be fine as speakers if you all have the video on and the rest of us have it off.
Okay, okay.
Great. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Thanks, Rahul, for introducing us and for setting the context for our presentation. We'll begin with a quick introduction to the British Council. Priya, may I request you to...
We can't hear you.
We can hear you.
Rahul, I can hear you.
Can everybody hear me?
I can hear you. I can hear you. I can hear you.
Yes.
Rahul, would you like to check your
I cannot hear you
connectivity?
because it says you've been muted.
Danish, we can hear you. Please, you can continue.
Sure, sure. Thank you very much. So Priya, may I request you to share your screen and the presentation, please?
Sure. Danish, can you see my screen? And others, can you all see my screen?
Yes, I can see your screen.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'm Habib from Morocco.
Okay, so Priya, you might want to switch to the presentation mode, and thanks very much. Take us to the next slide, please.
Hello.
May we request all others to keep their microphones mute, please?
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. I'm a little concerned because we're getting chats that some of the people are not able to hear us, but I think majority is able to. Can somebody confirm that?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, because I was muted, so I was not able to say. I can hear you.
Sure. Thanks very much again.
Yes. Yes, I can hear you.
Thank you again. Okay. I'm Danish Abdullah, as Rahul has introduced me, and both Priya and I work for the British Council. A quick introduction to the British Council. We are the UK's international organization for cultural relations and educational opportunities. As you can see on the screen, our founding purpose was to create a friendly knowledge and understanding between the people of the UK and other countries. We have been working towards it in all the 110 countries that we operate in. We share UK's expertise, content, and experience to create opportunity for people worldwide. The three focus areas of our work are arts, education and society, and English and examinations. After this, quickly to set the context for today's webinar. First of all, I would like to thank all of you for sending in your queries, your comments in pre-webinar task, and also in the registration form. We have got a lot of them and really, really thankful to you for taking time out for that. A quick thing I would like to highlight here is, since assessment is a wide area, and today we'll be looking at a specific approach to assessment. So there might be questions which might not be answered, and would be glad to take them as long as they're relevant. Apart from that, the questions that I went through in your pre-webinar responses and your registration form, we hope to cover them through our presentation today. And it's not a lecture, it's a discussion forum, it's an interaction forum with practitioners from across, hopefully, the globe and India, of course. So we'll be sharing ideas, we'll be to share your ideas with us. And of course, there's room for differences. And at the end, we hope to learn from each other. With that, let's look at the outcomes for today's webinar. So we have got 6 statements here. Each statement has got a gap, and we have got 6 words at the top. Can we look at the first one? Can you type in your responses and complete this statement from one of the words at the top?
Ways.
I'm afraid, although it's the right one, it's not in one of our options.
Yeah. Please select from one of the words at the top.
Also, guys, you can use the chat window to put it down. I'm here seeing a lot of approaches also in the chat window.
Brilliant. Yeah. Many right answers coming in there. Approaches.
Amazing. Thanks very much. Let's look at the second one. So the right answer is approaches. Let's look at the second one. Dash between assessment for learning and assessment of learning.
Distinguish.
Brilliant. I think many of you were writing that in. We can see distinguish coming in. Thank you. That's the right one. Distinguish between.
Great. Let's go to the next one. I think this is a slightly difficult one, let's say, and everybody has proven me wrong.
Yeah.
Seeing lots of advantages.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Articulate advantages.
Yeah. Well done, everyone. Let's look at the next one. Priya?
Okay. For some reason,
Outcomes.
it's not moving. I'm going to the next one, but it's not moving.
Sometimes a slow internet causes this. Let's give it a little time.
Priya, in the meanwhile, can you also read it out to us with the blank as well? Because the options are still it's still visible. So we can get started, and when it happens to load, we'll be able to see what it is.
I'll read it aloud. Okay.
List some of the ways dash assessments for learning in your classes.
Lots of
To use.
Brilliant. To use, yeah. List some of the ways to use assessments for learning in your classes.
I think by the time it loads, you might want to read that.
Sure. Dash assessment for learning in classroom teaching scenarios using some of the ways listed above.
Keep trying. Will not give it away so easily. Okay. All right.
Seems like we're evenly split. Apply and discuss.
Yeah. And the last one is the most difficult one. So yeah, let's quickly get there.
Why assessment for learning classroom teaching scenarios? Assessment for learning in classroom.
Yes, the right one is apply. Can we look at the last one then? Which of course everybody knows the answer to by now.
Yeah.
Okay, we've got. I'll read it out aloud to everyone. If it's dash and find answers to questions around using assessment for learning in your classes. Dash and find answers to questions around using assessment for learning in your classes. Great, can we try this one? I can see answers pouring in. Amazing, well done everybody, a big hand to all of you. I'll quickly check if Priya is with us.
Yes, Danish, I'm very much here. The only issue here is that I'm not able to move slides. I'm trying to go further, but it's not moving.
Priya, let's not worry. What I'll do is I'll share my screen, yeah?
Sure.
Just give me a little while here.
If it helps, Danish, Ashwath has just begun sharing screen. It's not freezing for him. Ashwath, if you can continue sharing screen, then we're pretty good.
Okay, so let's go to the next one and have a quick look at. Actually, we can skip that. We have already spent quite some time on outcomes. It's not very clearly visible to me. I wonder how is.
Same here. Same here.
Yeah, Ashwin, you may stop sharing. What I'll do is I'll
Very,
share.
very hazy.
Yeah, that's how it is to me too. Yeah. I'll share my screen. Just allow me a little minute here.
In the meanwhile, I'd like to apologize for the technical difficulties. It tends to happen to the best of us, despite some of our incredible planning. So just request you to kindly bear with us for a few minutes. We'll make sure it's up and running in the best way possible. Currently, we've just gone over the outcomes for our webinar today. We're waiting on Danish to share his screen with us so we can move ahead in the presentation itself.
Yeah, and Danish has just started screen sharing.
In the meanwhile, before we get started again, Danish, I just want to remind everyone, please place yourselves on mute and to cut out your audio, audio and video. This is just so that we can maintain bandwidth and there's no cross connection when we are having this conversation. Yeah. Thank you. Yes, Danish.
Thanks very much. So we have had a quick look at the outcomes. Is there any that you would particularly like to discuss at the beginning, or should we move on now? You may type in your responses.
Let's move on.
I think we don't have any questions at the moment, Danish, so we can move on.
Yeah. Okay, so before the webinar, we had also requested you to take part in a pre-webinar survey. We received a lot of interesting responses from you. Let's take a quick look at those responses. The first question we asked was, what is assessment in the context of teaching and learning? And we have received many responses ranging from tests to examinations to role plays to feedback with your students. We'll look at them in a minute in more details. And the second question was, we do not necessarily need assessment in the classroom. We asked you whether you agree with this statement or disagree. We'll look at these two in a minute. The third one was to check your feelings about being assessed. And unsurprisingly, most of the teachers feel positive about being assessed, with some being neutral about it. We had also asked you, why do you feel the way you feel, whether positive, negative, or neutral? So we received that it helps you in your professional development, in your skills enhancement. It's an opportunity to learn. Some of you also raised the importance of how it is managed and how it is portrayed. So interesting in responses there. The next one was on your feelings about assessing your learners. And again, we received positive response on this, where a clear majority feels positive about assessing our learners. We had also asked why. So the reasons were, it measures the progress, it tells us where it's at.
May we request you to put your microphone on mute, please, unless you're...
I think that, that was Anamika. Please place yourselves on mute. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Yeah, so somebody has also raised the importance of sharing the outcomes with external stakeholders. For example, the parents, the students' parents. Lastly, we asked you, how do you think your students feel about being assessed? And the results are here. While quite a few of us feel that they feel positive about it, there's still a bit of numbers that feel they're either neutral or negative about it. So we'll find out why. And actually, we had also asked you why, and you have raised issues around that it's sort of being mapped against each other's performance, being graded, being marked, and sort of labeling them as brilliant, not so good, etc. That's why they don't necessarily feel quite positive about it. So in today's webinar, we'll look at some of the ways how we can make them feel a bit more positive. With this, may I request Priya to take over, please?
Sure. Thank you, Danish. So just like Danish mentioned, some of our one of our pre-webinar questions to you was around a statement which we'd asked you whether you agree or disagree, and we'd asked you why you do so. So based on your responses, we have some more teacher quotes here, and we're going to show you one quote at a time. Can you say whether you agree or disagree in the chat box, please? So can we have the first statement, please?
And also please tell us why.
Why do you agree and why do you disagree? Why do you feel what you feel? Thanks, Danish. So assessments create an unnecessary pressure on students. Do you agree with this statement or do you disagree? Could you please type this in the chat box and also support it with a reason why? Okay, Alia agrees with this statement. Okay, disagree. Because weaker students might not feel comfortable. Very true, Shrama. It does create a pressure on weaker students. Okay, can you support your answer with a reason, please? Ah, very true. Somebody said that
it's stressful
the frequency of assessment is more. Arpit Kothari. Thanks, Arpit. So when you have too many assessments, it creates unnecessary pressure on students.
And somebody has raised the issues around the stressful environment.
Yeah, involves stress, true. Yeah. Okay, that's nice.
Let's go to the next one.
Let's go to the next one now. Assessments help us know how well students are learning. What do you think about this one? Okay, when the form of assessment is not interesting. Formative assessments do help, I agree, yeah.
And now let's start to look at the next one, assessment.
Yeah, okay, what about the third one?
Oh.
Can we have the third statement, please? It is essential to assess students regularly to establish accountability. This is an interesting one. What do you think about this one? Okay. So most of you say yes. It is important to establish accountability, right? Okay, but whose accountability are we talking about? Okay, ours and our learners, very true. Teachers and students, yes. I think we're all very clear about this. Should we move to the fourth one now? Assessments help me make need-based classroom decisions. So do you rely on your assessments to help you decide on your next classroom routine? Excellent. Okay, to some extent. Wonderful. So most of you feel positive about this. You agree with this. Okay, let's move to the next one. Okay, this came from one of our participants. I think we do not need any assessments beyond scheduled tests and exams in the academic calendar. What about this statement? So you only need your semester exams and your unit tests, no other assessments at all. We need formative assessments along the way, absolutely. Disagree. Okay, so unanimous disagreement there. That's great. Academic exams must be broken down to smaller tests. It should be a continuous process, okay? And the final one, assessment is not a one-off event, but a part of everyday classroom teaching. Do you agree with this one? I think this kind of, yeah. So most of you agree with this. This kind of contradicts the previous one. Yeah, so everybody who disagreed to the previous one would have agreed to this one. Brilliant. Lovely. So thank you for sharing your views on statements around assessment. So how do you assess students? This was another question we'd asked you in the pre-webinar task. And we've tried to categorize your responses, and we've tried to kind of get the common ones together. So here are the responses. We got a range of them. Some of you said oral tests is a way to do it, worksheets, tasks, semester exams, observation, open book tests, etc. Can you categorize these ways of assessing students? Do you think it falls under two broad categories? Any guesses which are the categories that these fall under? Let's look at oral tests. So which category do you think oral test falls under? Which category of assessment? Okay, formative and summative. Any other categories you can think of? Anything that comes to mind?
Yeah, I think we're looking at approaches to assessment.
Approaches to assessment. Any approaches that come to mind? Wonderful. I saw somebody, Suyog's written AFL and AOL. Okay, what do you mean by AFL? Can you please elaborate? What's the full form for everybody's benefit?
I'll give it away.
Brilliant, yes. Let's give it away. So assessment of learning and assessment for learning. AOL stands for assessment of learning and AFL stands for assessment for learning. Brilliant. So your task is you need to categorize each of these ideas under one of the two approaches. And can you think of anything that falls under both these approaches? Let's look at oral tests to begin with. Where do you think oral tests falls under? Is it AOL or AFL? Brilliant. AOL, that's right. So can you do the same thing for all the others, please?
Can I come in here?
Sure, Dhanush.
What we could do is we can start with AOL and identify various ways to assessment that we have got here and categorize them that you think come under AOL.
AOL, okay. Let's look at AOL. Brilliant. Which of the others in this box come under AOL? Semester exams, brilliant. Yes, that falls under AOL. What about presentations? Making presentations, do you think that would be AOL or AFL? Okay, MCQs, multiple choice questions. Written tests, yes, certainly. Weekly and unit tests, brilliant.
Great. Can we now quickly look at some?
We move to AFL now.
Yeah.
Obviously, the ones you've not told me in AOL. So which ones? Yeah, self-assessment certainly comes under AFL. Observations. Feedback from students, brilliant. Concept checking questions. Okay, so let's move to the next slide and quickly compare your answers here and have a run through.
And of course,
wonderful. Most of it is what you've told us. We've got some of these here, which we thought would be assessment of learning and for learning, depending on how it is conducted. For example, tasks. Depends on what task you set up. It could fall under AOL or AFL. Similarly, making presentations. Worksheets, the way you design your worksheets will decide whether you're doing it for AOL or AFL. And the same is the case with role plays. Brilliant. Okay, should we move to the next slide in that case? So we've arrived at two approaches for learning. And based on your responses in the pre-webinar task, we felt that there is a strong need for you to, most of you asked for more information on assessment for learning. Therefore, this webinar is going to focus on exactly what you need, assessment for learning. So in the chat box, can you quickly give us some key features or a definition of what assessment for learning is? What does it mean to you? Share your thoughts on what it means in the chat box, please. Okay, children have learned and take decisions on the basis of that. Involve the learner as you are doing now. Okay, excellent. So you think involving the learner, that's nice. Brilliant, it facilitates the learning process. Excellent. Anything with an objective to teach via feedback? Basis of objective of the lesson. Excellent. So should we look at a couple of definitions? Brilliant. You're all nailing it. We have a couple of definitions here. Have a quick read through. The first one is up on the slide. And can you identify the key features of AFL? Brilliant. It's continuous and evolving. Yes, Swapna, it's continuous, it's engaging. Okay, can we have the second definition, please? Excellent. Assessment for learning is the process of seeking and interpreting evidence for use by learners and their teachers to decide where the learners are in their learning, where they need to go, and how best to get there. So based on these two definitions and based on your definitions as well, can we quickly identify some key features of AFL? And you can type it in the chat box, please. Flexibility, okay. Feedback, brilliant. Excellent. It gives you the chance to improve.
Evidence of courses.
Yeah, yeah.
And very importantly, students' involvement.
Students' involvement, yeah. Part of the learning process.
Yeah, that's really important. It helps us fill the gap between
Yeah,
teaching and learning.
yeah.
And it is ongoing. Yeah, Priyanka, thanks very much for that. Thanks, Nadi. It definitely promotes reflective practices. So yeah, let's move on to the next slide.
Move on to the next slide, yeah. So right there, key features of AFL. It is an approach to teaching and learning and therefore is a feature of everyday classroom practice. So it's an ongoing process, like most of you said. It's a way to collect evidence and feedback to decide the direction of teaching, which leads to improved learning outcomes and therefore needs an active participation from both learners and the teacher. So both parties are equally involved and actively involved in this. Excellent. It's helpful in making students become more confident in expected learning outcomes and standards thereof, and therefore being better able to chart their learning path. It's an effective tool to inform teaching approaches and making changes therein to better meet the learning needs and preferences, and therefore leading to a more rewarding and memorable learning experience. That's, I think, the key that we want, right? A memorable learning experience for our learners. Excellent. So most of you gave us the same key features. Over to you, Danish.
Yeah, sure. So now we'll look at some of the ways to use assessment for learning in our classroom. So thinking about the kind of activities we looked at in the slide from the pre-webinar task and looking at some of the features we have discussed, can you think about how we can use assessment for learning in our classroom? If you could key in some of the ways in the chat box, please.
Okay. Rinal says show of hands. Bijit says using Google Forms.
Yeah.
Exit slips, interesting.
Discussion, feedback forms, yeah. Okay, great. So as we can see, there are different ways to do it. We'll look at 5 of them, broad ones today, and we'll focus there. So the first one that we are looking at today is asking questions, monitoring and listening actively, encouraging self and peer assessment, giving developmental feedback, and using some of the ways for assessment of learning in a more learning friendly manner. So these are the 5 ways that we focus today. Let's move on. So now look at all the 5 techniques that we've got here for assessment for learning. We'll give you 1 minute to clean your responses, and for each of these, we'll look at them one by one. You have to answer 3 broad questions. The first one is, so for example, if we're looking at asking questions, we'll have to think about how we can use this in our classrooms. Secondly, we'll think about what could be some of the possible advantages of asking questions in classroom to assess for learning. And thirdly, imagine if I'm a teacher who would like to start using this technique in my classroom, what tips would you like to give me to do it more effectively? So let's relook at the 3 questions here. How we can use this in our classroom, advantages, and any tips to make it more effective for a teacher who would like to try it in their classroom. Let's look at the first one, asking questions. Keeping the 3 questions in mind, can you please key in your responses for the first one? How we can use it in our classrooms. Great. And what could be some of the possible advantages of using questions in your classroom to assess for learning? Yeah, we have got a lot of responses here for feedback, for comprehension check, to elicit. Yeah. To check whether they understand the content clearly. Yeah, to find out if there are any misconceptions. Yeah, that's really important. It'll make them think and not just make them depend on rote learning. A kind of communication, the communication that leads to better learning. When the remedy is needed, metacognition, very importantly. Okay, great. Opportunity, thinking process, to check the learning gap. Great. We've got a lot of responses. Let's now look at some of the tips you will give a teacher who would like to start using asking questions. What should I bear in mind before I start asking? open-ended questions. If you could also tell us a little more, why open-ended questions and when? Question bank. Open-ended, to the point, questions to the point. Contextualized. Clearly. Yeah. Yeah, think critically, okay. Sure, let's look at some of the responses that we've collated here. Yeah, that's very important to not pinpoint kids, give them time to think. Yeah, that's very important. As a teacher, sometimes we tend to hurry right after asking questions. Yes, who can answer? Who can answer? Okay, great. Let's look at what we've got here. It's more or less a summary of what you have said. So asking questions is an effective way to find out how much learners know about a topic, so elicitation. And further, to check the understanding of what we have taught, so the finding the gap between teaching and learning. And as you were saying, when we ask questions effectively, we are actually helping our students develop their higher order thinking skills, which gradually lead to help them become more autonomous and lifelong learners. Furthermore, I also feel that when we ask effective questions, we are also promoting a habit to make our students curious. And they tend to ask more questions in return as well, which help them find answers on their own. A few quick tips for teachers to use questioning more effectively. Somebody has raised open questions. They're of course important, but closed questions are particularly effective to check and understand them. So we need to make this decision when we should use open and when we should use closed questions. Thinking time, of course, very important. So they need some time to process and articulate their response. So allow them that little time. This is something that I feel was not really covered in what we saw in our chat. So sometimes what we observe in classes is that a few selected students get more opportunities to answer, maybe because they are more active and they are more keen to answer. We need to think how we can give equal opportunities to different learners. Some of the ways here could be asking students to nominate each other instead of you picking them. Allowing them time is of course helpful as well. Another thing you could try is ask them all to raise their hands if they've got the answer right, and then ask them to answer a little later. So you're actually giving them time in two different ways. Most times as a teacher, we feel that it's my duty to tell learners whether the answer is right or not. That doesn't have to be the case all the time. So you can ask and you can encourage learners to react to each other's answers. What do you think about this? Do you agree here? And really important to remember, while the right answers tell us what they have learned or understood, the wrong ones tell us where the gap is and help us identify those gaps. And hence they're equally important, if not more. So it's also important to help your learners see the role that questions play in the process of teaching and learning, and how the right questions can lead us to finding answers and areas we need to work further. Does anybody remember what the next technique was? Here it is. So the three questions again: how to use it, what are the advantages, and what tips would you give to somebody who would like to use it in their classes? Please type in your responses. To look for any errors. That's an interesting one. Scaffolding, checking notebooks, respected teachers identify how to improve. All right, I do agree with you. Monitor their writings in notebooks. So this is something we'll discuss in a bit more details, I would think. Monitoring doesn't always have to be of the notebooks. Lead revision, okay. Motivation, using interactive journals. Okay, so I'll elaborate a little here. When I say monitor, I also mean observe them while they're on a task. So let's look at what we've got here. So monitoring learners while they're on a task. So you set up a task, you allow them some time, and then you monitor. It gives us a real insight into how much they've understood of a topic, how well they're able to apply this knowledge to move towards the successful completion of that specific task, and any areas they might be unclear about. Similarly, so when we ask them a question and they talk to us, or even in general, when we listen actively to a learner's responses and ask questions effectively, it gives us a lot of help in understanding their learning needs, and which in turn informs our teaching practice. So these are the two areas we're looking at here. A few tips for teachers, and I can see responses coming in. Yes, so a few tips for us here. We need to realize that monitoring can be daunting to learners. So when your teacher comes and stands right next to you, it's a little unnerving at times, and you tend to shut up. So learn and find ways to do it a little discreetly. Something that I find particularly useful is to stand at a little distance and observe from there. Another way to do it could be to stand behind their backs. So you're not facing them, you're silently standing there and observing from there. Another thing that I at times do is, I stand close to one student and I observe somebody a little distant. So that's another way to do it a little discreetly. Very important, as we discussed while talking about asking questions. Always allow some time to learners to get along the task before we start to monitor. If I start to observe and monitor right after setting up the task, it might actually deviate them from the task. They might become too cautious of my presence, so it might actually affect their learning negatively. So remember to do it a little later when they've started to feel more confident with the task. We all know teacher memory is a fantastic tool, but then to make it even more effective, we can silently use the sticky notes to capture our findings by this observation. And somebody has raised this in the chat box. They said to find errors, which is of course an important aspect. We should also find and make a note of what they are doing well, what their strengths are, because it's important. They need to keep developing those strong areas as well while they work on their areas for development. So not just errors as well as the areas of strength. Yeah, that was the next point actually. Yeah. So don't be just focused on learner errors and mistakes. We must also make a conscious effort to find things they are doing well and highlight them. So after we've got all of this data, we've got all of these notes, we've found their strengths and areas for development. A very good idea is to discuss them with the learners and ask them to find what they feel their strengths are, what is it that they would like to work further on. We'll look at this in a little while, how we can co-plan our lessons with them. based on this data. The next one was self and peer assessment. Think about the 3 questions. And if you could key in your responses, how we can use this. What could be some advantages and tips for teachers. So let's start with how we can use this. It's Sana's favorite one. Ask them to rubrics, peer feedback, how much they participated in the last week. Do you agree, disagree? Self-feedback form. Great. Now let's look at some of the advantages of using peer and self-assessment. That's very important, giving positive and constructive feedback. Can we quickly look at some of the developmental feedback to modify teaching, autonomy? Great, we've got a sample question there. What would you do differently? Useful for self-assessment, critical thinking, optimistic changes could be seen. All right. Yeah, start reflection is such a... So yeah, somebody says that we don't learn from experiences, we learn from reflecting on those experiences. So of course, reflection is critically important in our learning journey. Better, innovative. Lastly, let's look at some of the tips here. How we can use self and peer assessment. So let's look at what we've got here. So as we have covered all of this, we'll not spend much time. But important to remember that when we ask them to assess their peers and share that feedback with each other, they also enhance their social skills. So one way to introduce this could be your student journal or learning logs. You can of course name it something more fun. So some of the questions that you can put in there. What I found easy, difficult, what helped me learn, what I'm going to continue to do or do differently. Somebody had raised this about constructive feedback. So it's very important, especially in terms of peer assessment, that we make sure we first of all set up this practice of giving feedback more positively and constructively. And as a teacher, we model this. Really important for us. Priya, may I request you to take us further?
Certainly. Can we move to the next slide, please? Any guesses what the next one was?
Just a quick time check, guys. We're at 6:25. Just keeping you updated.
Perfect.
Yeah?
Thank you. Thanks, Rahul.
No problem.
Okay, so the same 3 questions. How can you use giving developmental feedback in the classroom? How can you give feedback and use it as an assessment tool in your classroom? Can we have some responses in the chat box, please? Okay, using polite language. Okay, that's how you should be giving feedback. Very good, giving sandwich feedback. Yeah, the screen is blank because we're waiting for your responses, Jyotsna. Okay. It should be constructive. You need to appreciate the efforts. Okay, what are the advantages of giving developmental feedback? Can we move to the advantages?
Priya and Danish, could you quickly in one line just explain to us what developmental feedback would mean, just so that everyone's on the same page?
Sure.
Thanks.
Sure. So when you give feedback to someone with an aim to help them develop in what they're doing, it could be a mix of positive and areas of improvement. That is developmental feedback. It's not overtly negative. It doesn't focus only on the negative aspects. It focuses on what someone did well and what could have been done differently in order to improve.
Yeah, and
thank you.
It definitely results in an action plan for them, how they're going to do better when they do the same task or similar task next time.
Absolutely. Excellent. Okay. It's an encouraging element. Okay. It motivates learners. Brilliant. So should we have a quick look at, it helps correction and allows reinforcement. Brilliant. We'll have a quick look at what we've got. So which stage of the lesson? So it is the stage where learners and their teacher work together, and to talk about the present stage of learning, where they want to get to and how they will get there. So there is a clear plan in place, and feedback helps overcome any barriers to learning and fills any gap between teaching and learning. And therefore, it leads to better learning outcomes. So whatever gaps you have between teaching and learning, your feedback helps to cover those gaps, and it helps your learners to improve in their learning outcomes. Here are some tips for you. So while assigning a task, I think this is something we really believe at in the British Council. It's important to discuss its aims and what will success look like at the end of it. So at the end of it, how will you rate them? What will be the evaluation parameters? It's important to discuss it at the onset of the task itself, so that it's clear to the students and so that they can perform accordingly. Discuss the criteria you will use to evaluate their work. Very true. When you give them marks and grades, you usually shift your focus from the teacher's comments. I think it would be really nice for you to supplement it with some comments. Okay, so if you've got an 8 out of 10, why have you got it? You've done this really well. And maybe here are a couple of areas where you could probably look at improving your work. So if you're looking at AFL, comments are more useful than marks. Structuring your feedback with focus on the task and not the learner. Many a times we get carried away by the quality of the learner, and we give them feedback on, suppose I've heard feedback comments like, how was the class today? It was very good. The teacher was excellent. What does that mean? It's not structured feedback, right? It's not focused also on the task. So when you're giving feedback to students, your use of the adjectives was very good, for example. Your use of the present continuous tense was very good in today's essay. Things like that, which are very focused and structured feedback. Personal praise is not quite helpful in learning. I know many of you would disagree with this, but we're not here to give them personal praise. It doesn't really support their learning outcomes.
Yeah. What I would add here is personal praise might actually boost their confidence, etc.
Yeah.
When it comes to learning, it's better that our feedback is focused on the task.
Perfect. Yeah. Thanks, Danish. Okay, moving on to the final one. What was it? Any guesses here? Okay. Thanks. Ashwath has given it away. Making AOL learning friendly. Now, all of us know that we have our constraints in the system that we work in. We cannot completely do away with AOL, right? So we can try and make AOL more learning friendly than what it is probably currently, and try and work around what we have. So how can we make AOL learning friendly? Any suggestions on that in the chat box, please? Yes, Jyotsna, the screen is still blank. Because again, we're eliciting responses from you. It will get populated in a bit.
Yeah, and that's first. populate the chat box, then we'll look at the screen.
Okay, you could use activities and games, activity-based assessments. How else can you, okay, comfortable classroom environment. Open notebook, open book tests, okay.
Interactive science.
Okay, should we move on to see what we have here?
Sure.
Okay, so that's exactly what I told you right at the beginning. Exams are a part of the school education system, and with some bit of thinking, we can surely use it to support learning more effectively. We can't completely do away with it. Much as I would like it, much as you would like it, we can't completely do away with exams. A slight change in approach might not only help learners do better, but also change their perception of exams. So here are a few tips to use tests and exams to support learning. Before the exam, help learners reflect on their strengths and areas of development. Encourage them to plan how they can work on the areas of development in particular. So this needs to be done right before the exam, not when you're sharing their papers with them, not when you're giving away the grades, right? Discuss how exams can help them identify their strengths and help them plan their further learning. There's usually this negative connotation around exams. It's important to break that and tell them that it'll help them plan their further learning and kind of get them to befriend the exam monster.
Yeah, and what can help them tackle this monster?
After the exam, allow learners to look at their marked answers and identify which areas they were able to score marks and where they need more clarity to be able to do better. This, I think, really promotes learner autonomy because you are giving them the freedom to go into their answers, go through it, see where they've done well, identify areas of development. So really promotes learner autonomy in the classroom, makes them accountable for their own learning, and encourage peer discussion to help learners clarify any minor misunderstandings and gaps. This links back to what Danish mentioned in self and peer assessment. Many times we want to give it all to them. So maybe time to step back and let the peers take some action. And do we have one more here? Yeah. So spend time to find out which areas most students did well and areas that need more work. You could discuss this with them and co-plan upcoming sessions. Brilliant. So it's all about discussing with them, sitting down with them and talking to them about what they did well. And most of them, if they've done well in some area, you know that all of them have understood that. And if there is an area which most of them are struggling with, you know where you need to work towards.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
And it also makes your classroom so much more connected. Like learners feel they are part of the learning process. They're not just being taught. So
Yeah.
I think it changes the whole dynamics of a classroom.
The classroom, yeah, true. Okay. Time for some group discussion.
We'll look at it slightly differently. So what we'll do is we'll quickly go to the scenarios.
Sure.
And let our participants decide what and how we can.
Sure. Okay. So we have some classroom scenarios very similar to ones you would be facing on a regular basis in your classroom. These are related to assessment issues. You can tell us whether you want to work in breakout rooms in groups or whether you want to key in responses in the chat box and go ahead with this. Is that right, Danish?
I think because of the paucity of time,
yeah,
not be able to.
Sure. So we'll assign, we can go through, there are 3 scenarios. Should we just take them one after the other then, and we can discuss in the chat box?
Yeah.
Yeah, it might make sense to quickly read the scenario and get their responses in the chat quickly, so we can move to this every few minutes per slide.
Perfect. Let's do that. So I'm going to read out the first scenario. Listen to this and please let us know how the teacher can make this assessment scenario more effective? You need to decide whether it is effective and let us know how it can be made more effective. Nikhat teaches classes 7 and 8. She has noticed that when she grades papers and returns them to the students, they simply accept the grade and refuse her invitation for them to improve their score. Thank you very much, they'll say, but I'm fine with my C. So do you think this is a very pleasant situation? Okay. So how can Nikhat make it more effective? Not at all. Okay. So what could Nikhat do differently?
Yeah, so think about the 5 ways that we've just discussed. Feedback along with grade.
Oh, very nice. So when you say feedback, Sufala, you mean comments along with the grade? Like we discussed, peer evaluation and incentive. Okay.
So what might incentive mean here?
Yeah, I'm wondering what incentive is. I think they're stonewalling the teacher.
Wrap up with the students.
Ram says purpose to be discussed before the assessment. Excellent, Ram. Wonderful. Substitute grades with something else. Have a discussion and let them grade themselves. That's a very, very autonomous way of grading.
Yeah, and Swati highlights the importance of giving positive comments.
Excellent. Asking why they feel so. Okay, asking questions. Excellent. Divya says talk to children before assessments. That's crucial. So all the discussion that Nikhat can have can be done before the assessment and not while she's handing over the papers to the students. Brilliant. Encourage them to grade themselves. Should we have a look at what we have? Some suggestions, Danish?
Yeah, please bear with me as I quickly flip through slides to get us.
Sure.
Yeah.
There. That was really quick. Okay, so some suggestions that we have for Nikhat's scenario, very, very similar to what you've shared in the chat box. Students may not find Nikhat's offer to help to be genuine. That's probably why they're refusing her help. Nikhat could have probably offered to help beforehand while students were preparing for the exam. While talking about assessments and exams, she could also discuss its aims and what success will look like at completion. This is what one of you pointed out rightly in the chat box. I think Ram pointed it out, yeah. She could discuss the criteria she would use to evaluate their work. I think one of you again mentioned this too. Brilliant. She can start writing comments for students along with the grades and marks. Yes, this also was there in the chat box. Looks like we've copied your answers now. Okay, wonderful. Any other suggestions? Last point is not what the research says. Okay.
If Michelle could...
Michelle, could you please elaborate what you mean? The last point in the scenario suggestions, is that what you mean? Okay. So start writing comments for students along with the grades and marks. Okay. Can you share the quote for everybody's benefit here? Read out the best and model answers in the class as well. Okay. Peer feedback can help.
Yeah, I definitely
agree. Always
Michelle.
for peer feedback.
Yeah, and I think I agree with what Michelle says, and that's what we sort of discussed in AFL. Comments are more important, so we don't look at grades. But here, because it's AOL and we're trying to make it more learning supportive, we're trying to supplement the meta and STEM. I agree with what Michelle says there.
True, true. Thanks, Michelle.
We can overcome this. We can maybe help them start to look at it.
Yeah, I think it's just about getting used to it, right? So gradually introducing your comments and getting them to focus more on your comments than on your grades.
Yeah, right initially. I wonder if we can do that. All right.
Okay. Should we move to the next scenario?
Yeah,
And you
great.
have to move back as swiftly as you moved forward, Danish.
Yeah, okay, we've got it.
There you are. Okay, so this is scenario number 2. We have a different teacher, Santosh. Santosh is a teacher of English for classes 9 and 10. He's not sure if all the students in his class have understood a particular concept well. Most of the times, the same ones raise their hands, and Santosh ends up nominating from among these students. Even if he gives the others an opportunity, he has realized that he's beginning to lose patience. He ends up answering the questions himself. While he ends up acknowledging the right answers, he doesn't know what to do when students give incorrect answers. Most of his students, however, do well in exams. What do you think? What is Santosh's problem here? And how can he probably make it better? How can he improve? Missing the golden virtue of patience, yeah. Written tests evaluated individually would be better.
Evaluated individually.
Swati, a little more elaboration on that, please. Allowing group tasks in class. Okay, that's the problem. His method is not reaching all. Wonderful. Monitoring and listening actively might be missing. If his student... True. Quick peer interaction instead of asking directly.
Yeah.
Okay, quite a few answers there. Concentrate more on those who are not answering.
Should I be the Speedy Gonzalez?
Yeah.
Do this, okay.
Okay, some suggestions here. Allow thinking time before eliciting answers. Think of ways to give equal opportunities to all the learners. I read about this somewhere online very recently. You can get them to do a little thumbs up. Instead of doing a hands up, you could get them to do just a thumbs up so that they're not afraid of answering and not everybody in the class notices that their hands are not up. And the teacher then nominates, if they feel that they're confident, their thumb goes up and they feel a little more confident. This was in one of the Edutopia videos that I watched. Allow learners to react to their peers' answers. While right answers tell us what learners know, wrong ones, okay, so they're equally important.
I have no idea what I've done. Okay, just a minute. Okay, yeah.
So like Danish said, it's important to establish that it's okay to be wrong. It's okay to give wrong answers. It tells you that you need to work in that area a little more. So it's all about establishing that atmosphere in the classroom.
Yeah.
Moving to scenario number 3.
A lot of useful comments in the chat box. Certainly not able to acknowledge all of them.
Thumbs up as bingo and thumbs down as take. Interesting.
Okay, should we look at the next scenario?
Yeah, the third and final scenario, please. Okay, so this is another teacher, Prajakta, who teaches young learners. She's discovered that reteaching something that students were not able to score good marks in tests and exams is more challenging than starting from the point of questions. I think it's a challenge. Unlearning is a big challenge for all of us. She's noticed that students lose interest in revision classes as she tries to explain difficult concepts and challenging areas after tests and exams. She also feels her students are way too dependent on her. Prajakta would like them to take more responsibility of their learning, but doesn't know where to start. Can we help Prajakta? How can we help her? Have flipped classrooms, okay? Sufila, could you elaborate for the benefit of others what you mean by flipped classrooms. Activity-based learning. Very nice. Revision can be more student-led.
Improve presentations.
Needs to use multiple measures from an earlier stage, not wait till tests. Excellent, Neha, yes. Peer teachers, yeah.
Mind maps.
Wonderful. Use a different method like multimedia. Okay. So use multimedia for revision. Is that what you're saying, Ram?
Thanks, Ekta.
Thank you, Ekta. Thank you for your comments. Quizzes can be arranged. Okay. Wonderful. In flipped classroom, teacher gives classroom tasks at home. Yeah, yeah. Lovely. So should we have a quick look at what suggestions we have, Tanish,
Yeah.
for this scenario?
Like with the chat box. Yeah. Okay, there we go.
Brilliant. Mostly covered here. Prajakta could think about how observing her learners while they work on tasks could help identify areas that they are confident and where they might need more support. One way to keep students' interest might be to encourage students to identify areas they need more work and to co-plan any revision classes to address those areas. A way to make students more autonomous is by allowing them to assess their own and peers' work. It was their peer assessments. It will gradually allow them independence and make them take responsibility of their learning. She could further consider introducing student journals or learning logs to help her learners develop confidence and skills of self-assessment. For peer assessment, however, she would need to model and help students give feedback in a positive and constructive manner. Yeah, very, very important. Before we jump into peer assessments, we need to set it up and ensure that it happens in the smoothest possible way. Otherwise, it could actually turn really bad than do good to the student. Wonderful. Inviting feedback on the activities she uses in the class might be a good place to start. Yeah. So to find out. Lovely. Thank you for your comments, everyone. Should we move to the next slide?
Which is
a summary, Danish.
Yep.
Okay. So that brings us to, we're almost towards the end of our webinar. A quick summary here. Danish, would you like to take this forward?
Yeah, sure. So broadly speaking, as we discussed today, there are two approaches to assessment: assessment of learning and assessment for learning. They both have their own roles to play, of course. Today we focused on assessment for learning. It's an approach to teaching and learning. It's not so much of a testing. It's not testing at all, to be honest. It's a part of your teaching, and it helps learning in your classroom. So it's a part of your everyday classroom practice. It leads to learners taking responsibility of their own learning, and the teacher guides them through this journey. Some of the ways that we discussed today to use assessment for learning in our classes include asking questions, monitoring and listening actively, encouraging self and peer assessment, giving developmental feedback, and using assessment of learning in a more learning supportive manner. While teachers start planning using assessment for learning, if you are starting new, if you've been doing it for a while, you could start to consider writing a journal to document your journeys. This journal could help us in making our future decisions, building from our past learning. And it's a useful tool to further enhance your skills and support your peers' professional development, that you share learning with each other. So you could think of sharing that journal with each other, or you could actually publish it, if not in a physical form, publish it online using a blog. Yeah, that's what we have got here. Now, should we be moving to question and answer quickly before sharing additional resources?
Yeah, I think we should.
I'll just put it in the chat window as well. Guys, we're going to open up the space for questions and thoughts. Would love for you guys to write in your questions, your doubts, your thoughts in the chat window, or even feel free to take yourself off mute and ask out loud. We've got Priya and Danish who's going to help us by answering these questions. Yeah.
Just to answer some comments in the chat box, the summary will be mailed to everybody, right, Rahul?
Yes. So the summary, along with the presentation used and all the resources, will be emailed as well to everyone. I'll just reply to that, as well as it will be housed on the Firki webinar page too.
Sure. Danish, there's a question here. Can you share formats and resources for student journals for us to get started? Yes, Dipti. What we can do when we send across a summary of this to the Firki team, we can share links. These are all available online. We can share links to where you can find journals, student journals, and reflective logs. Another question.
One question from Rinal is,
yeah, I think
there ideas to design an effective feedback form?
Okay, Danish, what would you say? I think an effective feedback form certainly needs to cover what you expect, what you've actually given input on. So if I've delivered a session and I need to know what the aims of the session are, so the feedback form certainly needs to capture feedback around those aims and not go off on a tangent asking for feedback on something totally different. That's one key area I would certainly look for in a feedback form.
Yeah, and I would think the questions should be formed in a manner which promote reflection. So you using your feedback, feedback form, you make them reflect on the learning.
Absolutely, and I think they need to be specific as well.
Yeah.
So I cannot say, did you improve after this session? That shouldn't be a question on a feedback form, I would say.
Yeah, so could you give us a little more specific one for this, Priya?
Has this session helped you improve in your assessment literacy, or has this session helped you develop your understanding of assessment for learning? And then you have parameters around it, probably.
Yeah, and thinking about the context of our learners, you might also include some questions which build onto their learning and ask them how they plan to apply it.
Sure.
So for example, if I say, what have you gained from this session? How it will help you in your learning, how it will help you, for example, being more effective in writing a letter, for example.
Sure.
And very important to not focus only on areas which were well.
Yeah.
Balance it with areas for development as well.
Sure. So it should capture suggestions from the feedback provider on how the person could do better the next time.
We also have a few more questions come up. We've got one from our Facebook. We're going live on Facebook as well simultaneously. We've got one from our user on Facebook who asks, can you tell us a little bit more about assessment as learning? You mentioned it, I think, in passing at the beginning, and they'd like to just a little bit more about it because it wasn't deep dive into in the sessions. If you could just give us a little more information. We've got also a few more questions in the chat window right now.
Sorry,
I didn't get the questions very
yeah.
I heard assessment as learning.
Yeah, I apologize. My internet is acting
But I didn't get anything after that.
I apologize. My internet was acting up. Basically, the question was, he would be grateful if you give him some information about assessment as learning, because we didn't deep dive into that. that was it. That was the question in its entirety. Can you give us a little information on assessment as well?
Since that was not really the focus of today's webinar, what we could do is we could share some maybe resources.
Yeah, that works.
That a little later.
Yeah. Additionally, we've got some questions here as well, such as what should be given more weightage for assessment for learning, assessments of learning in primary classrooms, and ways to map Bloom's taxonomy with assessments for learning.
Unfortunately, I'm not able to keep a track of the questions here.
That's not a problem. Should I tell you what I'm saying in the chat window?
Yeah, that'd be helpful. Yeah.
Okay, so one question I'm able to read is what should be given more weightage: assessment for learning or assessments of learning in a primary class?
I understand. I think not a very easy
Yeah, it's a tricky one to answer.
Yeah, they both have their own function, and especially in the context of a formal education, it's definitely
I think it's important to strike a balance there,
yeah.
to kind of use it both in a way that it informs each other. So your formative ones or the assessment for learning ones could inform how you plan your lessons and where to fill in the missing gaps, whereas your AOL ones unfortunately or fortunately help you in giving them those grades that they need to go to the next level.
And the real world.
Yeah, in the real world, unfortunately. Yeah. So probably striking a balance is the key.
Another one that has come up is on personal praise. I know you mentioned it in passing that people might not agree. But what people want to know in general is, can you explain personal praise a little bit more? What does it mean, and how does one use it?
Sure. So
Just
I think Danish clarified immediately here. So Danish,
Yeah, and before we answer this one, a little thing that I would like to add about AOL and AFL and how to sort of strike a balance. I think it's also important to realize that AFL is a part of your day-to-day classroom teaching. So
not a one-off thing, yeah.
Yeah. So you don't really have to think about how often I should do this. Ideally, we should be doing this in each lesson. And eventually, it will lead our learners to better learning, which will help them do better in their AOL, hopefully.
Sure.
Now, we're talking about personal praise. So what we're trying to say is, when a learner completes a task, and for example, you say, I've never heard this one, so I'll use my name here. Danish, you're brilliant. So, it's definitely helpful in maybe giving
boosting Danish's confidence.
Yeah, and maybe making me become more confident. But then it does not really tell me what it is that I have done well. So it does not really result in helping me to learn better next time or to continue to do what I'm doing well. So as against this, if my teacher says, Danish, the structure of your essay was really effective. So I know that I've structured it well. Yeah. So instead of just giving a personal praise, AFL is more effective when we make it more specific to the task they do well or they want to improve further.
One more question that has come up and seems relevant because it talks a little bit about context, and it's the last one we'll take. The teachers, a couple of teachers have mentioned that in Indian classrooms, class sizes are large and they matter when you're conducting them. What are ways to conduct assessments for and of learning in classrooms that have 50 to 60 students in them?
So obviously, assessment of learning, I think we've aced it. We can do it with a class of 200 as well. Mm-hmm. But assessment for learning, like Danish mentioned, I don't think it's a one-off thing. It is something which is embedded into your everyday teaching learning. So if you do it through, putting students into groups when you teach them or conducting revision activities, I know it's a challenge in Indian classrooms and in our context to deal with large classes, but we do have techniques to deal with large classes as well. So you could conduct it as a group assessment. You could do it as if it's a speaking task, you could get them to do 1-minute jam sessions where you have a group speaking to each other. You could do a group discussion and find out if they're doing well. And I think you could do it in an ongoing basis with classrooms and divide it and plan it and do it in a better way rather than not do it at all.
Yeah, and
Manish, would you like to add something?
yeah, and I think much like anything else, it will take us a little time to gain confidence in, for example, using questions with a large group. But gradually we'll realize that using these techniques is actually making learning not just more effective, but also easier to manage the large group.
Okay, so I think that we've come to the end. Just to make sure that we're ending exactly on time, I'd like to start by thanking our speakers, Priya and Danish, for being generous with their time and expertise here today. Priya, Danish, if you could just in a sentence tell us a little bit about your experience in the last hour and a half or so, just in a quick sentence. Yeah.
Sure. I think I'm going to speak for Danish as well here, Danish, and you can add. We really, when we saw the registrations, we were a little overwhelmed and it was huge, but this audience has been amazing. It has been very interactive. Thank you everyone for all your inputs. We came here with an open mind to learn from you, and I think we both are going back quite enriched today after today's session. So very, very useful, great interactions. Thank you very much to the Firki portal, as well as all of you for participating, taking out time, being here right till the end. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I would also like to add my sincere most thanks to everybody. Especially right from the beginning, you've been very interactive. You sent in your pre-webinar tasks. You sent in a lot of great responses there. You sent in a lot of questions and comments in your registration sheet. And the chat box, I couldn't keep a track. Lots and lots of brilliant.
Yeah.
And I'm really going to spend time reading the chat after this session is over. It's been wonderful being with all of you. And as Priya said, we have learned a lot from this interaction.
Yeah. We'll try and answer as many questions as we can from the chat box if we've missed out on any of those. Many of those actually.
There are a couple of things as well. So if you have any further thoughts, and I can see some questions continue to pour in the chat window, I request you to kindly write in to us at contactfirki@teachforindia.org. The email ID will be put into the chat window. Ashwath or Prerna, if you could please do that. Contactfirki@teachforindia.org. Please email us with your questions and doubts, and we'll make sure that Priya and Danish, that is forwarded to Priya and Danish, will get a chance to respond to us. Additionally, we have a course on Firki called Formative Assessments that would be highly relevant to what we've covered in this course, along with strategies that you could use that also, a few of which were mentioned in the course today, in the webinar today. So strongly recommend you guys also take those courses and let us know whether you're enjoying them and how we can make this learning experience better for you. Finally,
can I just come in here? Sorry, Rahul, just a minute here. While we're talking about courses available, we also have the British Council Facebook page and the Twitter accounts. It is part of the slides here.
And Ashwath has been sharing those links in the chat. Thanks for
he's been doing that already. If you join one of these pages or both of these pages, we have in the upcoming week, we have a special focus on assessments itself. It's very relevant to the topic we discussed today. So you can go ahead and look at articles, videos, read up online on our page about assessments in more detail. And I'm sure it'll help you.
Yeah, and it's also an opportunity for you to
share your ideas.
Practitioners with you and
absolutely
gain more and more ideas.
Okay, so I'm going to sign out by quickly letting us know about our next webinar. Our next webinar, guys, is scheduled to take place on the 25th of September. It is on the topic of what teacher practices and perspectives grow student leadership. This webinar will be conducted by Stephen Farr from the Global Learning Lab team at Teach for All, along with members of Kids Education Revolution, the team working at Teach for India. So keep looking for 50 emails in your inboxes for information about this upcoming webinar. Thank you and good evening. Before you leave, please do take a minute to give us feedback on your learning experience in the webinar today. The feedback form is in the chat window. Thank you very much for being a part. Thank you, Priya, and thank you, Danish, and thank you everyone for taking time out.
Thank you. Thank you, Rahul. Thanks, Ashwath. Thanks, Prerna. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Have
Have a good evening.